The wind screamed through the Hindu Kush mountains like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of snow and cordite and death. Chief Petty Officer Alara Thorne lay motionless on the rocky ridgeline, her body perfectly still despite the freezing temperatures that had long since stolen all feeling from her fingers. Through the scope of her Mk-13 rifle, she watched the compound below with the patience of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 850 meters, perfect range for a .300 Winchester Magnum. The wind was steady at 8 miles per hour from the east, temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit, and the elevation difference between her hide and the target was 340 feet. She'd made harder shots. She'd made them in sandstorms, in darkness, with her spotter bleeding out beside her. This should have been easy. But something was wrong. Through her scope, Alara scanned the compound one more time. The intelligence briefing had been clear. High-value target, Taliban regional commander, known to meet with his cell leaders on the first Thursday of every month. 6 guards, maybe 8. Standard security protocols. In and out in 20 minutes. But the compound was silent. No guards paced the walls. No lights flickered in the windows. No movement anywhere except the wind stirring dust devils in the courtyard. After 8 years as a Navy SEAL, in 4 deployments to Afghanistan, Alara had learned to trust her instincts more than she trusted intelligence reports. And right now, every instinct she possessed was screaming that this was a trap. Her radio crackled to life, the voice of Commander Blake Sterling cutting through the mountain silence with professional calm. "Ghost, this is Havoc. We're moving to phase line Bravo. How's our picture?" Alara keyed her mic, keeping her voice low and steady despite the growing knot of dread in her stomach. "Havoc, this is Ghost. Picture looks clean, but sir, it's too clean. No sentries, no lights, no movement at all. Something feels off. Recommend cautious approach." There was a pause. Sterling had been her mentor, her advocate, the man who'd fought the bureaucracy and the old guard to give her a chance when everyone else said a woman couldn't hack it in the teams. He'd taught her to trust her gut, to listen to the voice that whispered danger when everything else said go. "Copy that, Ghost. Your instincts kept us alive in Kandahar. If you smell smoke, we believe you. We're Oscar Mike, but we're taking it slow." Through her scope, Alara watched Sterling's 6-man SEAL team materialize from the shadows like ghosts themselves, moving down the mountain path toward the compound with tactical discipline so perfect it looked choreographed. These were her brothers, the men who had initially doubted her, then tested her, and finally accepted her as one of their own when she'd proven herself again and again in ways that left no room for argument. Being one of the first women to complete SEAL training had meant living under a microscope. Every shot had to be perfect. Every physical test had to be exceeded, not just passed. Every mission was an opportunity for someone to say she didn't belong. The pressure would have broken most people. It had forged Alara into something harder than steel. The team reached the outer wall. Sterling raised his fist, the signal to hold. 6 operators froze in place, weapons up, scanning for threats. Alara swept her scope across the compound one more time, searching for any anomaly, any sign that her instincts were wrong. They weren't. Sterling signaled again. The team breached the gate in perfect synchronization, flowing through the opening like water, covering their sectors with the precision of men who'd trained together for years. That's when hell erupted. "Ambush! Contact front!" Sterling's voice exploded through the radio, no longer calm, but urgent and sharp with adrenaline. The compound came alive with muzzle flashes. Not 6 guards, not 8, dozens of them. Windows that had been dark suddenly blazed with automatic weapons fire. Doors that had been closed burst open to disgorge fighters who'd been waiting in the shadows. The courtyard erupted with tracers cutting through the darkness like deadly fireflies. This wasn't a high-value target safe house. This was a killing ground designed specifically for them. The intelligence hadn't just been wrong, It had been compromised. Someone had sold them out, and now her team was caught in a perfectly orchestrated ambush. Ilara's training took over instantly, emotions locked away in a box she'd open later, if there was a later. She acquired targets through her scope, prioritizing threats with the cold calculation that separated amateur shooters from true snipers. Fighter with an RPG in the second-story window, lining up a shot on Sterling's position. Range, 720 meters. Wind, 6 miles per hour, right to left. Holdover, 2 minutes of angle. She placed the crosshairs on his head and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the fighter's head snap back, the RPG tumbling from his hands to clatter harmlessly on the floor beside him. No time to confirm the kill, already moving to the next target. Machine gunner setting up in the eastern window, belt-fed PKM that could shred her team in seconds. Range, 650 meters. Crosswind adjustment. She squeezed again. The gunner dropped. Taking heavy fire. Sterling's voice cut through the chaos, professional despite the circumstances that were rapidly spiraling toward catastrophic. We've got wounded. Peterson's hit. I've got you covered, Ilara responded, her voice steady as she worked the bolt action with practiced efficiency, acquiring targets with mechanical precision. This was the zone, that place where time seemed to slow and every shot felt inevitable, where the rifle became an extension of her will and death was just mathematics and breath control. Fourth target down, fifth, sixth. She was a machine, emotionless and efficient, dealing death from a distance with the clinical precision of a surgeon. Contact left. They're flanking. Ilara swung her rifle to the left, spotting a squad of enemy fighters rushing from a nearby building, trying to cut off the team's escape route. She fired rapidly now, controlled pairs, dropping 2, then 3. But there were too many. For every fighter she killed, 2 more seemed to appear. Alpha 1, you need to extract now, Ilara called out, continuing to fire, her shoulder aching from the recoil, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline flooding her system. They've got reinforcements coming from the east. This is a coordinated assault. They knew we were coming. Working on it. Sterling's voice was strained now. She could hear the intense firefight through the radio, the distinctive chatter of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of AK-47s, the shouting of her teammates as they fought for their lives. Then Ilara saw it. Movement on a rooftop 300 meters to her right, a fighter shouldering an RPG-7, but he wasn't aiming at the SEALs struggling to extract from the kill zone below. He was aiming up, aiming at the ridgeline, aiming directly at her position. RPG, she started to shout, but the words died in her throat as the rocket streaked through the darkness, its motor flare cutting an orange line across her vision. The RPG struck the cliff face 40 feet above Ilara's position. The explosion was deafening, a physical wall of sound and pressure that seemed to punch the air from the entire mountain. But worse, far worse, was what came after. She heard it before she felt it. A rumble that started deep in the mountain, like the growl of some massive predator waking from ancient slumber. The entire rock face, already unstable from decades of erosion and harsh weather, began to move. Ilara had perhaps 2 seconds to process what was happening, 2 seconds to understand that tons of rock and stone were about to cascade down the mountain like an avalanche of death. 2 seconds to try to save herself. She lunged sideways, trying to scramble away from her hide, but there was no time and nowhere to go. The first boulder, the size of a small car, bounced over her position, missing her by inches. Then came the rest, a river of stone flowing down the mountain with unstoppable force. Ilara managed to curl into a defensive position, protecting her rifle and her head with her arms, making herself as small as possible. She had time for one final thought, crystal clear despite the chaos. This is how Marcus felt. Her brother, Army Ranger, killed in this same valley 8 years ago when his team had to leave his body behind during an emergency extraction. The pain that had driven her to become a SEAL, to ensure that no one was ever left behind on her watch, and now she was going to die in the same mountains that had taken him. The impact drove the air from her lungs like a physical blow. She felt her ribs crack, heard them snap like dry kindling. 1, 2, 3 sharp pops on her right side that sent lightning bolts of agony through her chest. Her left shoulder wrenched violently as a rock caught it at the wrong angle, and she felt the sickening pop of dislocation, the joint separating with a sensation that was beyond pain, entering some realm of hurt that the human brain couldn't fully process. Something sharp sliced through her left thigh, opening a gash that went deep, maybe to the bone. She felt hot blood soaking her pants, felt the warm wetness spreading despite the freezing temperature. Then came the weight. Creation, suffocating weight that pressed down on every part of her body simultaneously. Tons of rock and stone piling on top of her, burying her alive. She tried to scream but couldn't expand her lungs against the pressure. Tried to move but found every limb pinned in place. The darkness was absolute. Not the darkness of a moonless night, but the complete and total absence of light that came from being buried under 40 tons of mountain. The kind of darkness that made you question whether your eyes were open or closed, whether you still existed at all. Consciousness faded, pulled away by shock and pain, and the simple fact that her brain decided that being awake for this was too much to handle. Darkness took her. Below, Commander Blake Sterling stared up at the ridgeline in horror, watching the massive dust cloud rise hundreds of feet into the air, blotting out the stars. His radio was already at his lips, his voice desperate in a way that his men had never heard before. "Ghost, respond! Ilara, come in!" He pressed the transmit button again, harder, as if physical force could somehow bridge the gap between them. "Overwatch, if you can hear me, key your mic. Ghost, please respond." Static. Nothing but the hiss of dead air in the crackle of interference. "Chief Thorne, this is Havoc Actual. If you can hear me, any signal, anything." Nothing. Another SEAL, his uniform covered in dust and blood from the ambush, grabbed Sterling's arm with urgent force. "Sir, we've got to move. They're surrounding us. We've got 2 wounded who need immediate medevac. Sir, we have to go now." Sterling stared up at where Ilara's position had been, now buried under hundreds of tons of freshly fallen rock. His night vision showed only devastation, a fresh scar on the mountainside where the ridgeline had collapsed. The amount of stone that had fallen was incomprehensible. A house could disappear under that kind of avalanche. A truck, a whole platoon. No one could survive that. No one. Enemy fire intensified, bullets cracking past their heads, ricocheting off the compound walls with sparks and whining fragments. An RPG whooshed overhead, impacting 50 meters behind them with a concussion that rattled Sterling's teeth. "Sir," the SEAL shouted again, pulling harder. "Peterson and Davis are hit bad. We need to extract right now, or we're all dead." Sterling made the calculation that every commander dreads, the math that haunted the dreams of anyone who'd ever led men into combat. 7 men alive below, 1 buried under an avalanche with 0 possibility of survival. 2 wounded who would die without immediate medical attention. Enemy forces converging from multiple directions. Mission completely compromised. Every tactical consideration pointed to one conclusion: the right decision. The only decision. The decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Fall back to the extraction point," Sterling ordered, his voice hollow, each word feeling like he was swallowing broken glass. "Suppressing fire. Leapfrog movements. Move, move, move." The SEALs fought their way out of the kill zone with professional efficiency, 2 men carrying Peterson between them, Davis limping along with support, everyone laying down covering fire as they bounded toward the extraction point a click away. Sterling took one last look at the massive pile of rubble illuminated by the moon. Somewhere under there was the best sniper he'd ever trained. A warrior who'd proven herself 100 times over. A woman who'd broken every barrier and exceeded every expectation. Someone who'd saved his life in Kandahar and Jalalabad and a dozen other places whose names he couldn't remember through the fog of grief and adrenaline. And he was leaving her behind. The extraction helicopter roared in, a Black Hawk with its rotors beating the air like thunder, downdraft creating a storm of dust and debris. The SEALs loaded the wounded aboard first, then piled in themselves, weapons still pointed outward, covering their sectors even as the bird began to lift. As the helicopter banked away, gaining altitude and distance, Sterling stared out at the mountain, at the fresh rock slide illuminated by the moon, like a wound on the Earth's face. He keyed his radio to the base frequency, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the handset. "Command, this is Alpha 1. Mission compromised. We're coming home with 2 wounded." He paused. The next words caught in his throat like shards of glass. Like admitting them out loud would make them more real than they already were. 1 KIA. His voice cracked. Chief Petty Officer Elara Thorne she's dead. Ghost is gone. The helicopter banked away into the darkness, its running lights disappearing into the vast black expanse of the Afghan night, leaving behind only silence and stone and the ghost of what had been. And somewhere beneath 40 tons of rock, in a tiny pocket of air that shouldn't have existed, that had been created by pure chance in the specific angle of falling stones, Elara Thorne's eyes slowly began to open. Pain, that was the first thing. Not pain as a concept or an abstraction, but pain as a living entity, a thing with teeth and claws that was actively trying to tear her apart from the inside. White-hot, searing agony that radiated from every nerve ending in her body simultaneously, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement, demanding that she surrender to it. She tried to gasp for air and couldn't expand her chest, couldn't fill her lungs. The weight pressing down on her torso was immense, making each breath a battle that she had to win one inhalation at a time. Panic flared, bright and hot and all-consuming. Buried alive, the thought sent adrenaline surging through her system, the primal terror that lived in the oldest parts of the human brain, the fear that predated language and civilization. Her eyes opened to absolute darkness, not the darkness of night, but something more fundamental, the complete absence of light that came from being entombed beneath the earth. She couldn't see her hand in front of her face, couldn't see anything at all. For a moment, she wondered if she'd gone blind, if the avalanche had somehow destroyed her eyes. Then she realized she could feel dust on her eyelashes. She was seeing. There was just nothing to see. The weight on her chest was crushing, making each breath a struggle. She tried to move and discovered the full extent of her situation. Her right arm had some mobility, could move perhaps 4 inches in any direction. Her left arm was completely pinned, screaming in agony from the dislocated shoulder. She couldn't move her legs at all. She was trapped, completely and utterly trapped under tons of rock, with no way out and no one coming to save her because everyone thought she was dead. The panic threatened to overwhelm her, to shut down her brain entirely. She could feel it creeping up her spine, could feel her breathing accelerating despite the restricted space, could feel the edges of consciousness starting to fray. No. The word appeared in her mind with absolute clarity, cutting through the panic like a blade. No. SEALs don't panic. SEALs assess, adapt, and overcome. It was a mantra from Hell Week, from the worst moments of BUD/S training, when the instructors were trying to break her, when they'd tied her to the bottom of the pool and left her there to see if she'd quit. She'd survive that. She could survive this. Assess. She forced herself to think through the panic, to catalog her injuries with the clinical detachment she'd learned in combat medicine training. Ribs broken on the right side, at least 3 of them. She could feel the grinding sensation when she tried to breathe deeply, could feel the sharp, stabbing pain that suggested pieces of bone were moving independently. Probably not puncturing her lungs yet, but that could change. Left shoulder dislocated. She recognized the sensation from a training injury 2 years ago. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening. She'd need to relocate it eventually, but that could wait. Left thigh had a deep laceration. She could feel warm blood soaking her pants, could feel the rhythmic pulse that suggested it was bleeding steadily. She did a quick mental inventory of exactly where the wound was. Outer thigh, mid-level. If it had hit the femoral artery, she'd already be dead or close to it. The fact that she was still conscious meant she'd gotten lucky, if you could call any of this lucky. She wiggled her fingers. They responded. Tried to move her toes. She felt them shift inside her boots. No spinal damage. That was something. Head injury. Definitely a concussion. She could feel the fog in her thoughts, the way her vision seemed to swim even though there was nothing to see. Nausea rolled through her stomach. Classic concussion symptoms. Adapt. She couldn't stay here. That wasn't even a question. Stay still and she'd die. From blood loss, from hypothermia, from the slow suffocation that would come as she used up the oxygen in this tiny pocket of air. She had to dig, had to create space, had to get out. Ilara forced herself to focus on her right hand, the only part of her body with any real mobility. Slowly, agonizingly, she began to claw at the rocks and dirt above her face, pulling debris toward her body, compacting it beneath her, creating inches of precious space. Each movement sent lightning bolts of agony through her broken ribs. Every time she pulled her arm back, the broken bones ground together, and she had to bite back screams that would waste precious oxygen. But she kept digging, kept pulling, kept creating space one handful at a time. Time lost all meaning in the absolute darkness. She couldn't see her watch, couldn't see anything. There was only the endless repetition of movement. Dig, pull, breathe, ignore the pain. Dig, pull, breathe. Her fingers broke through to cold air. The sensation was so unexpected that for a moment she thought she was hallucinating. But no, there was definitely a draft, a current of freezing mountain air flowing across her bloody fingertips. She'd broken through. The surface was there. Ilara wanted to cry with relief, but she channeled that energy into digging faster. Her right arm thrust through the hole, then her head. She sucked in great lungfuls of freezing air that hurt her broken ribs, but felt like the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. Stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright in the clear mountain air. She'd been unconscious for hours. The firefight was long over. Her team was gone. Extracting herself from her tomb took another 20 minutes of excruciating effort. Every movement was a fresh negotiation with pain. She'd lever herself up an inch, wait for the world to stop spinning, then move again. The rocks shifted beneath her, threatening to trap her again, and she had to move with agonizing slowness to avoid causing another collapse. When she finally pulled her legs free and collapsed on top of the rubble pile, she lay there shaking, her body screaming at her to just rest, to sleep, to let the exhaustion and pain take her away. But sleep meant hypothermia. Sleep meant death. Ilara forced herself to sit up, nearly blacking out from the pain and the concussion. She needed to assess her injuries properly, needed to do something about the bleeding before she lost too much blood to function. Her headlamp was gone, buried somewhere in the rocks, but the moon provided enough light to see by. She examined herself with clinical detachment, treating her body like it belonged to someone else, just another casualty to be triaged. Left shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, definitely dislocated. She'd have to relocate it herself. The thought made her stomach clench, but there was no choice. Her left thigh had a deep gash, still bleeding sluggishly, soaking through her torn cargo pants. It needed to be dressed immediately. 3 broken ribs on her right side, maybe 4. Nothing she could do about those except wrap them for stability and try not to get hit there again. Her head pounded with what was certainly a concussion, vision blurring periodically, nausea coming in waves. Dangerous, but not immediately life-threatening. Cuts and bruises everywhere. Her uniform was shredded, but she was alive. Her rifle lay a few feet away, partially buried. Ilara crawled to it, every movement an exercise in pain management, and pulled it free. She checked it over with practiced efficiency, running through the functions check automatically. The scope had a crack across the left lens, a spider web of fractured glass that would affect her aim, but not make the rifle useless. She had 1 full magazine remaining, 20 rounds of .300 Winchester Magnum. Her sidearm was gone, lost somewhere in the avalanche. Her radio was smashed to pieces, crushed under the weight of stone, just useless plastic in circuits. Ilara took inventory of her remaining gear, pulling items from her pockets and pouches. 3 protein bars, somehow intact despite everything. 1 canteen, half full. A small first aid kit, her combat knife, a lighter. That was it. No way to call for help. No way to signal friendly forces. No spare ammunition. No backup weapon. No emergency beacon. She was alone, injured, deep in enemy territory, and presumed dead by her own team. The smart play would be to panic, to give up, to sit here on this pile of rocks and wait for someone to find her, either friendly forces or the enemy, whoever came first. But Ilara had never made the smart play in her life. She joined the Navy when everyone said women couldn't be SEALs. She'd survived Hell Week when 90% of the men quit. She'd taken every hard assignment, every dangerous mission, every chance to prove that gender had nothing to do with capability. And she'd buried her brother in Arlington National Cemetery with the promise that she'd never let someone be left behind the way he had been. A promise was a promise. "Okay, Thorne," she whispered to herself, her voice rough and strange in the mountain silence. "Time to prove them wrong. Again." First things first, the shoulder. She couldn't operate effectively with it dislocated. Every movement sent waves of nausea through her system. She needed full range of motion, or as close to it as she could manage. Ilara braced herself against a large boulder, positioned her left arm at the correct angle, took 3 deep breaths, and slammed her arm upward and backward in one sharp, violent motion. The shoulder popped back into the socket with a sickening crunch that she felt through her entire body. She screamed, the sound echoing across the mountains, then immediately clamped her mouth shut and froze, listening intently for any sign that she'd been heard. Nothing, just wind and the settling sounds of rock. The pain from the relocation was immediate and intense, but different from the dislocated agony. This was the pain of damaged tissue being forced back into position, of ligaments stretched beyond their limits, of a joint that would never quite work right again. But it was manageable pain, functional pain. She could work with that. Using supplies from her first aid kit, Ilara packed and bandaged her thigh wound as best she could. It needed stitches, needed proper cleaning, needed about a dozen things she couldn't provide. But she had superglue, the combat medic's secret weapon. She cleaned the wound as best she could with water from her canteen, then squeezed the edges together and ran a line of superglue along the gash. It burned like fire, but it held. Field expedient medicine at its finest. She wrapped her ribs tightly with an ACE bandage from the kit, creating compression that would help stabilize the broken bones and make breathing a little easier. It wouldn't heal them, but it might keep the breaks from getting worse. 2 ibuprofen from the kit, 800 milligrams. It would barely touch the pain she was feeling, but it was something. She dry swallowed them and immediately chased them with water from her canteen, drinking sparingly. She didn't know when she'd find more water. She ate half a protein bar, forcing the food down despite her complete lack of appetite. Her body needed fuel, needed calories to keep her warm, to keep her moving, to keep her alive. Then she looked down the mountain toward where the forward operating base lay, 42 kilometers to the southeast. The lights of the base twinkled in the distance like stars fallen to earth, close enough to see but impossibly far away, given her condition. Enemy forces would be searching this area at dawn, looking for bodies, salvaging gear, confirming kills. They'd seen the avalanche. They'd know someone had been up here. She couldn't go down the mountain the obvious way. They'd be covering all the approaches, waiting for any survivors to try to make it back to friendly lines. She had to go up and around, through the high passes where they wouldn't expect anyone to travel. Not in her condition, not alone, not without proper gear or communications or support, which meant they wouldn't be looking there. Ilara shouldered her rifle, the weight familiar and comforting despite everything. The concussion made the world tilt and spin, but she moved anyway, started walking, started navigating by the stars, using the training that had been beaten into her through years of... As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with bands of orange and red, Ilara spotted something that made her change course entirely. Against every though of the promise she'd made at his grave, no one left behind, not on her watch, not ever. The smoke grew larger as she approached, and with it came the confirmation of her suspicions. She found cover in a small cave as the sun rose fully, her body demanding rest, her concussion making her vision blur. But she couldn't rest yet, needed to assess the situation first. Through her cracked scope, she studied the source of the smoke. Helicopter wreckage. An MH-60 Blackhawk, its tail boom severed cleanly, probably by an RPG. The fuselage was crumpled and burned, still smoldering from fires that had burned through the night. Army markings. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. Bodies lay scattered around the crash site, some covered with ponchos. But there was movement. 4 figures moving slowly, establishing what looked like a hasty defensive perimeter. Survivors. Ilara spent an hour observing, making absolutely sure it wasn't an enemy trap. She'd seen it before, insurgents using downed aircraft as bait, waiting for rescue forces to arrive so they could spring an ambush. But these figures moved like Americans, carried themselves like soldiers. One was clearly working on a casualty. Another was trying to fix a radio, ultimately slamming it down in frustration when it wouldn't work. Army Rangers, by their uniforms and unit patches, trapped, cut off, no comms, waiting for a rescue that might not come. She'd found her mission. Ilara began her approach, moving slowly from cover to cover, staying low, using every bit of concealment the terrain offered. As she got closer, she could see them more clearly. 4 Rangers total. One was working frantically on a casualty, a combat medic, young, female, her hands covered in blood. Another was providing security, scanning with his rifle, clearly the senior NCO by his bearing. A third lay on a stretcher, barely moving, critical condition. The fourth sat against a rock, legs splinted, immobile. They'd been here at least 18 hours based on the burn pattern of the wreckage and the state of their defensive position. No rescue had come. They were on their own, just like her. Ilara was 50 meters out when the ranger on security spotted movement and spun his rifle toward her position. She froze, then slowly raised her hands, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. "Friendly," she called out, her voice rough from dehydration and screaming. "U.S. Navy SEAL." The ranger's eyes widened in shock as she stepped into the open, and she knew what she must look like. Covered in blood and dirt, uniform torn and shredded, moving like every step might be her last, rifle slung across her back. She looked like the Walking Dead, which technically she was. "Holy hell," the ranger breathed. He was older, probably late 30s, with an NCO's bearing and staff sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His name tape read, "Brennan. You're supposed to be dead. The radio traffic this morning said a SEAL sniper was KIA in the mountains. Avalanche burial." Ilara managed a grim smile as she approached, despite the pain it caused her split lip. Yeah, well, reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Now, how many you got, and how bad are they? She entered their defensive perimeter, and the full scope of their situation became immediately clear. 4 Rangers total, and only 2 of them in any shape to fight. Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan, the NCO who'd spotted her, had his arm in a makeshift sling, probably a dislocated elbow or broken wrist. Still functional, still dangerous, but diminished. The young female combat medic working frantically on the casualty was Specialist Hayden McKenna. Couldn't be more than 23, with blonde hair pulled back in a blood-matted ponytail, and the look of someone who'd been crying recently, but was too professional to let it show while working. Her hands were steady despite the obvious stress. The soldier with the splinted leg was Sergeant Wade Drummond. They called him Ironside, she'd learn later. Heavily muscled, even sitting down, with a leg splint that looked professionally done, but couldn't hide the severity of the injury. Compound fracture, probably femur. He couldn't walk, could barely move, but his eyes were sharp and his rifle was within easy reach. And on the stretcher, barely breathing, was Private First Class Garrett Sullivan. Young, maybe 21 at most, with skin gone pale and lips tinged blue. Internal bleeding, by the look of him. Ruptured spleen, maybe liver damage. Critical, didn't begin to cover it. Internal bleeding, McKenna said without looking up, her hands slick with blood as she adjusted an IV line. He needs a surgeon, like yesterday. Our medevac never came, radio's dead, and we've got enemy patrols searching the area every few hours. Brennan looked at Ilara, really looked at her, taking in her obvious injuries, her cracked scope, the way she favored her right side and moved like every step cost her. No offense, Chief, he said carefully, but you look like you can barely stand. How exactly are you going to help us? It was a fair question, a reasonable question, the kind of question she'd been hearing her entire career, usually asked by men who thought a woman couldn't possibly measure up to their standards. Ilara unslung her rifle, moved to a slight rise that offered a view of the surrounding area, and settled into a prone position despite the screaming protest from her broken ribs. She'd spotted them while approaching. 4 enemy fighters moving through the valley below, heading directly toward the crash site. Range, 420 meters. Wind from the left at 6 miles per hour. Easy shots under normal circumstances. These weren't normal circumstances. Watch, she said simply. 4 shots rang out in quick succession, the reports echoing across the valley. 4 bodies dropped before they even knew they were being targeted. Clean headshots, all of them, between 400 and 420 meters. Ilara worked the bolts smoothly between each shot, her breathing controlled despite the pain, her movements economical and precise. She rose slowly, turning to face Brennan. His jaw had gone slack. Through his binoculars, he was staring at the 4 bodies scattered across the valley floor, then back at the SEAL sniper who just killed 4 men in under 20 seconds while barely able to stand. That's how I'm going to help you, Sergeant, Ilara said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady through the pain. Now let's talk about getting you and your Rangers home alive. Brennan stared at her for a long moment, making his decision. The skepticism in his eyes hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been replaced by something else, cautious hope. Maybe, just maybe, this half-dead SEAL could actually pull off the impossible. They spent the next several hours in detailed preparation. Ilara and Brennan scouted the immediate area, memorizing terrain features, identifying potential choke points and danger zones. Every step was agony for Ilara, her ribs grinding like broken glass with each breath. But she forced herself to move, to think, to plan. We'll follow this wadi for the first 2 clicks, Ilara explained, pointing to a dry riverbed on the map. Gives us cover from observation, keeps us off the skyline. Then we cut through this village here. It's small, maybe a dozen buildings. Brennan studied the village location, his expression troubled. That village could be full of fighters, Chief. Could be, Alara agreed, which is why I'm going through first. I clear it, you follow with the casualties. We move in stages. I advance, secure, signal you forward. Slow but steady. You can barely walk yourself, Brennan observed, not unkindly. Then it's good I can still shoot, Alara said, checking her rifle for what felt like the 100th time. 16 rounds left after the demonstration. She was going to have to make every single one count. McKenna approached with her medical kit. Chief, let me at least clean and redress that leg wound. Infection will kill you as sure as a bullet. Ilara wanted to refuse, to stay tough, to prove she didn't need help. But McKenna was right, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She sat down heavily and let the young medic work. This needs stitches, McKenna muttered as she cleaned the wound, her touch gentle but efficient. Like actually sutures, not field expedient garbage. Field expedient is all we've got, Alara said through gritted teeth as McKenna worked. Super glue will hold it. McKenna looked horrified. You already used super glue on this? Chief, that's what I had available, Alara finished. Do what you can with what you've got. That's the job. McKenna shook her head but did as instructed, using medical adhesive to reinforce the edges of the wound before wrapping it tightly with fresh bandages. You SEALs are absolutely crazy, you know that, right? That's what they keep telling us, Alara said with a slight smile. Then more seriously, how are you holding up, McKenna? The young medic's hands trembled slightly as she worked, and Alara saw the cracks in her professional facade. Honestly, I'm terrified, Chief. Sullivan is dying and I can't save him here. Ironside's in agony. We're surrounded by enemies who want to kill us. And our best hope is a half-dead SEAL sniper who probably shouldn't even be conscious. That's a fair assessment, Ilara admitted. But here's the thing, McKenna. Fear means you're smart enough to understand the danger. Now you just have to be brave enough to move anyway. Can you do that? McKenna finished bandaging and met Ilara's eyes. Despite the exhaustion and fear, there was steel there, the kind that didn't break under pressure. Rangers lead the way, Chief. We don't quit. Good, Ilara said, accepting McKenna's help to stand. Because neither do SEALs. By the time they returned to the crash site, McKenna had Sullivan and Drummond prepped for movement. The travois for Drummond was crude but functional. 2 sturdy poles salvaged from the wreckage with a poncho stretched between them, creating a makeshift sled. Sullivan lay on an improved litter, an IV bag secured above him with paracord and ingenuity, his breathing shallow but steady. McKenna had given him morphine, carefully calculated to keep him comfortable without suppressing his respiratory drive to dangerous levels. Ilara knelt beside the young private. His skin was gray, lips tinged blue, the color of someone losing the fight against internal bleeding. 21 years old and dying in a foreign land, far from the West Virginia hills he'd called home. Not on her watch. Hang in there, Sullivan, she whispered. We're getting you home to your mom. His eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and confused. Mom? He mumbled through the morphine fog. Soon, Ilara promised, though the word felt like a lie in her mouth. Real soon. Brennan approached with his M4, his expression serious. Chief, I need to say something. When you showed up, I looked at you and saw someone who couldn't possibly help us. I saw your injuries, saw that you were barely standing, and I doubted you could do anything but slow us down. You were protecting your team, Ilara said. Can't fault you for that. No, I was being a judgmental ass, Brennan continued. My father served in the Gulf War back in '91. Told me his whole life that war was man's work, that women didn't belong in combat. I believed him without question. But you've shown me something different in just a few hours. Leadership isn't about gender. It's about competence, heart, and refusing to quit when any sane person would. I don't know if we're going to make it out of here, but if we do, it'll be because of you. Ilara nodded, accepting his words. Then let's make sure we all live long enough for you to put that in an official report. We move at 1900. That gives us darkness to cover our movement. At 1900 hours, as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they moved out. Brennan and McKenna carried Sullivan's litter between them, moving with careful synchronization. Drummond was harnessed to the travois, an M240 machine gun across his chest, still dangerous despite his immobility. Ilara took point, moving 50 meters ahead, her senses hyper-alert despite the exhaustion and pain that threatened to overwhelm her with every step. The wadi provided good concealment, its high banks hiding them from observation, but the rocky terrain made for brutal travel. Behind her, Ilara could hear the occasional grunt of pain from Drummond as the travois bounced over stones, could hear McKenna's labored breathing as she struggled with her end of Sullivan's litter, could hear Brennan's quiet words of encouragement. Sullivan remained silent, too silent. Ilara spotted the first real threat about an hour into their movement. Two fighters standing guard at a stone bridge that crossed the wadi, smoking cigarettes and talking, relaxed and unaware. They weren't expecting trouble. Why would they? As far as they knew, the Americans from the helicopter crash were trapped and contained. Ilara ranged them at 390 meters. Difficult shots in the failing light, the sun painting the mountains orange and red, shadows growing long and deceptive, but not impossible. Nothing was impossible if you understood the mathematics of ballistics and controlled your breathing. She keyed her radio. Brennan had given her their backup short-range unit, their only remaining means of communication. Alpha, this is Overwatch. 2 tangos at the bridge, 400 meters north. Taking them now. Copy, Overwatch, Brennan's voice crackled back. Standing by, Ilara settled into position, her body finding the familiar comfort of a shooting stance, despite the broken ribs that made every breath a negotiation with pain. First target, older fighter, heavy-set, standing on the left side of the bridge. She placed the crosshairs on his head through her cracked scope, compensated for the slight evening breeze that had picked up as the temperature dropped, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth pressure that had become automatic after thousands of rounds fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the fighter drop, dead before he hit the ground. His companion barely had time to register surprise before Ilara's second shot took him in the chest, dropping him beside his friend. Bridge clear, Ilara reported, already moving forward to secure the position. Moving to confirm. She reached the bridge 2 minutes later, her breathing labored, her vision swimming slightly from the concussion. Both fighters were dead, their weapons still slung across their backs. They'd never had a chance to return fire, never even knew what killed them. Ilara signaled Brennan forward, and the team crossed quickly, moving with professional efficiency. Drummond gritted his teeth as the travois bounced over the uneven stone bridge, but he never made a sound beyond a sharp intake of breath. 2 down, Brennan said quietly as they passed the bodies. Ammo count? 14 rounds, Ilara replied. The math hung unspoken between them. 14 rounds remaining, at least 30 kilometers still to go. Unknown number enemies between here and safety. The ammunition was going to run out long before the targets did. The village appeared ahead as darkness settled fully over the valley, a cluster of mud brick compounds huddled together for protection against the harsh mountain winters. Dim lights flickered in a few windows. Dogs barked in the distance, their voices carrying across the cold night air. Ilara signaled the team to hold position while she moved forward alone. This was the most dangerous part, clearing unknown structures in darkness, any one of which could hold enemy fighters or civilians or both. One wrong decision could alert the entire village, bring every fighter running. She moved like a shadow through the narrow alleys, her rifle up, scanning with night vision goggles she'd salvaged from the crash site. Most buildings were empty, abandoned when the fighting had intensified in this sector months ago. A few housed civilians, old men, women wrapped in shawls, children who should have been sleeping but who watched her pass with eyes made old by war. Ilara put a finger to her lips, the universal gesture for silence. They nodded, understanding passing without words. They'd seen enough American soldiers to know that she wasn't here to harm them. They'd also seen enough Taliban fighters to know what would happen if they raised an alarm. In the last compound, Elara found 3 fighters sleeping in what had once been a storage room, their rifles stacked carelessly against the wall. She could kill them easily. 3 quick shots, or even quieter, 3 swift cuts with her knife. They'd never wake up. But gunshots would wake the village, would create chaos, bring more fighters running. And knife work, that would take time she didn't have, put her in close quarters where her broken ribs and injured shoulder would be liabilities. Elara made a decision that went against every tactical instinct she possessed. She moved past silently, leaving them to their dreams. Sometimes the best fight was the one you avoided. Sometimes mercy was the tactically sound choice. She'd realize later, when those same 3 fighters showed up at the mining facility as part of the final assault, that mercy always had a cost. "Village clear," she radioed back to Brennan. "Come through quiet. Stay to the left side of the main path. Avoid the eastern compound." The team moved through like ghosts, their footsteps barely audible on the packed earth. They were almost clear, almost through to the far side, when a door opened and an old man stepped out, drawn by some sound or instinct. He saw them, froze. His eyes went wide as he took in the scene. 4 American soldiers, 2 of them on litters, moving through his village in the darkness. For a heartbeat, Elara thought he'd shout an alarm. Her hand moved to her sidearm, her mind already calculating how quickly she could silence him, how many seconds they'd have before the whole village woke up. But the old man looked at Sullivan's pale face on the litter, looked at Drummond's splinted leg, and something like pity crossed his weathered features. He'd seen war, had probably lost sons to it. He understood what he was looking at, not invaders, but wounded men trying to get home. He stepped back inside without a word and closed the door softly behind him. "Keep moving," Elara whispered, and they did. They reached the river crossing at 2300 hours, the Helmand tributary cutting across their path like a dark ribbon in the moonlight. The water wasn't deep, maybe waist-high at the deepest point, but the current was strong, and the water was snow-melt cold, the kind of cold that could steal your strength and your warmth in minutes. Elara waded in first, testing the footing. The icy water hit her wounded leg like a physical blow, pain so intense it drove the air from her lungs. But the cold also numbed some of the persistent ache, and she'd take any relief she could get. "Slow and steady," she called back softly. "Watch your footing. Current's stronger than it looks." Brennan and McKenna entered the water with Sullivan's litter held high, trying to keep him as dry as possible. Drummond pulled himself along with his massive arms, the travois floating partially behind him, his face contorted with pain and cold, but his jaw set with determination. They were halfway across when everything went wrong. Sullivan started convulsing. "He's crashing!" McKenna screamed, forgetting all noise discipline in her panic. "BP's bottoming out. He's coding." Brennan struggled to keep his end of the litter stable, while reaching for his weapon as McKenna started chest compressions in waist-deep water, the current threatening to sweep them all downstream. "Come on, Sullivan, come on!" McKenna was shouting now, tears streaming down her face mixing with the river water. "Don't you dare die on me. Your mom's waiting for you. Don't you dare." And because the universe had a cruel sense of timing, that's when the enemy patrol appeared. Elara saw the silhouettes on the ridge above them, heard the shouted challenge in Pashto, saw muzzle flashes as they opened fire. "Contact right!" Brennan yelled, trying to keep the litter stable with one hand while reaching for his rifle with the other. Bullets cracked overhead, splashing in the water around them. Elara was already moving, slogging through the current toward the far bank, every step a battle against the water and her failing body. She reached solid ground and dropped prone, bringing her rifle up. 3 fighters on the ridge, 260 meters uphill. Her vision blurred, the concussion making her see double for a moment. She blinked hard, forced her eyes to focus, willed her body to be steady for just a few more seconds. First shot, clean miss. The round sparked off rock behind the target. Damn it! The curse exploded from her lips. She never missed. Hadn't missed a shot that mattered in 3 years. But her body was failing, the concussion throwing off her depth perception, the cold making her hands shake. Second shot. She forced herself to slow down, to breathe, to remember her training. The fighter dropped. Third shot. Another hit. The enemy fighter tumbled backward off the ridge. The remaining fighter dove for cover. Ilara swept her scope, trying to find him, knowing he was lining up a shot on Brennan or McKenna or the helpless Sullivan. Behind her, she heard McKenna. Got a pulse. I got a pulse. Weak, but it's there. The enemy fighter popped up to shoot. Ilara found him in her scope, led him by 2 feet to account for his movement, and squeezed. Headshot. He fell backward and didn't move. Clear, Ilara called, her voice ragged. McKenna, how is he? He coded for almost 90 seconds, McKenna gasped, still performing chest compressions as they dragged Sullivan to the bank. I got him back, but Chief, he's not going to survive another episode like that. His body can't take it. He needs that surgeon now. Not in 6 hours. Now. Ilara checked her watch. They'd covered 4 kilometers in 4 hours. 4 more to go. At this pace, they'd make the mining facility in another 4 hours. Sullivan wouldn't last that long. The math was brutal and unforgiving. Then we move faster, Ilara said grimly, forcing herself to her feet despite her body screaming protests. Brennan, can you and McKenna fast walk with the litter? Not a run, but faster than we've been moving? Brennan looked skeptical. In this terrain, at night? Chief, one of us trips and Sullivan dies from the fall. I'll clear the path ahead, Ilara said. Mark obstacles, identify hazards. You move as fast as you safely can. Ironside, can you pull yourself faster? Drummond's face was tight with pain and cold, his lips starting to turn blue from the icy water, but he nodded with fierce determination. Double time crawl, Chief. I can do it. Then we move now. No more stealth. Speed is survival. The next 4 hours became a blur of pain and determination. Ilara ranged ahead, pushing her failing body beyond limits she thought were absolute. She took out threats as she found them. 2 fighters here, 1 there, another pair at a checkpoint. Her ammunition count dropped steadily. 11 rounds, 9, 7, 5. Behind her, she could hear the team crashing through brush, no longer bothering with stealth because there was no time for stealth. She could hear McKenna crying as she ran, knowing every bounce of the litter was potentially killing Sullivan. Could hear Drummond's labored breathing as he pulled himself forward with superhuman effort. Could hear Brennan's steady encouragement, keeping everyone moving when exhaustion wanted them to stop. Ilara's leg wound reopened, fresh blood soaking through McKenna's careful bandaging. Her ribs felt like they were stabbing into her lungs with every breath. The concussion made the world tilt and spin, and twice she had to stop and vomit from the vertigo, then force herself to keep moving. But she kept moving, kept shooting, kept clearing the path. At 0500 hours, with dawn approaching and all of them running on fumes and willpower, they crested a ridge and saw it. The mining facility, exactly where the map said it would be. Stone buildings silhouetted against the lightning sky, a main structure with outbuildings scattered around it, tailings piles creating natural defensive barriers. They'd made it. There, Ilara pointed, her voice barely more than a wheeze. That's home. They stumbled down the slope, discipline and tactics abandoned in favor of simply reaching safety. Ilara cleared the main building on autopilot, her body moving through the motions while her brain operated in a fog of pain and exhaustion. Empty, abandoned, dusty but structurally sound. McKenna immediately set up a medical station in the most protected corner and went to work on Sullivan with renewed desperation. Brennan collapsed against a wall, his chest heaving. Drummond lay where they'd left him, unable to move another inch, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. Ilara slumped beside Brennan, her rifle across her lap, completely spent. Every part of her body was screaming. She'd pushed past exhaustion miles ago and was now running on something beyond physical capability. Pure will, pure refusal to quit. "How's Sullivan?" she managed to ask. McKenna looked up, and Ilara saw the answer in her face before she spoke. "Alive. Barely. Chief, he won't last another 12 hours without surgery. Maybe not even 6. Ilara nodded, too tired to even feel the weight of that deadline. "Get some rest," she told Brennan. "In 2 hours, we're going to ring the dinner bell. And when we do, every enemy in this valley is going to come running." Brennan stared at her with exhausted disbelief. "That's insane." Ilara smiled, exhausted and half dead but unbroken. "Yeah, that's kind of my specialty." Dawn broke over the mining facility like a warning, painting the eastern peaks in shades of red and gold that reminded Ilara of blood and fire. She stood at the main building's upper window, studying their position through her cracked scope, despite the way it made her head pound. The facility sat on a plateau carved into the mountainside by decades of mining operations. It gave them excellent fields of fire in 3 directions, clear sight lines down into the valley where enemy forces would have to approach. But there was only one viable escape route, a narrow canyon to the north that could become a death trap if they weren't careful. "Chief, you need to see this." Brennan's voice pulled her from her tactical assessment. Ilara descended the creaking stairs, each step a fresh negotiation with pain. Brennan had found a storage room filled with remnants from when this place had been operational. Rusted mining equipment, old tools, and most importantly, 3 intact 55-gallon drums with faded labels that still read diesel fuel. Beside them, several coils of detonation cord and a box of blasting caps. "Jackpot," Ilara breathed. Drummond, lying on his travois near the door, grinned despite the obvious agony. "I know demolitions from Ranger School, Chief. I can make things go boom." "Good," Ilara said, "because we're going to turn this place into hell on earth." She laid out her plan quickly. They'd rigged the fuel drums as improvised explosives, placed them at key choke points. When the enemy came, and they would come, they'd channel them into kill zones and light them up. The explosions would be massive, visible for miles. "That'll work once," Brennan said, "maybe twice. But McKenna says Sullivan has maybe 6 hours left. Even if we signal for help, how long before the QRF reaches us? 2 hours? 3? We need to hold for potentially 5 hours." "Which is why we don't just defend," Ilara replied. "We create the biggest signal they can't ignore. Smoke, fire, explosions, something visible from 50 clicks away." McKenna appeared from the medical room, her face drawn. "He's fading fast. Blood pressure's critical. Without a surgeon, I'm just watching him die." Ilara gripped McKenna's shoulder. "You've kept him alive 24 hours past impossible. That's a miracle. Now we hold on a little longer." They spent the next 2 hours preparing for battle. Ilara positioned the first 2 fuel drums at key approaches, wiring them with detonation cord under Drummond's patient instruction. Brennan reinforced defensive positions with whatever materials he could scavenge. At 0900 hours, McKenna emerged again. "He's crashing. I got him back, but Chief, this was the last time." "We're out of time." "Everyone to positions," Ilara ordered. "Brennan, upper floor with me. McKenna, stay with Sullivan. Ironside, ground floor west window. When I give the signal, we light this place up." She climbed to the upper floor, moving to the window with the best view. Through her scope, she could see enemy patrols searching the area. Her radio, a captured enemy unit, crackled with voices in Pashto. They knew someone was at the mining facility. They were organizing an assault. 40 fighters, maybe 50, converging from multiple directions. "Here they come," she said to Brennan. 20 minutes, maybe less." Through the radio, she heard the enemy commander, the Wolf, intelligence called him, a tactical thinker who'd orchestrated multiple successful ambushes. His voice was calm, professional, organizing a coordinated assault from 3 directions. "Can we hold?" Brennan asked quietly. Ilara looked at their defensive position, mentally calculated the odds. The honest answer was no, but honesty was a luxury they couldn't afford. "We're about to find out," she said. The enemy forces appeared in the valley below. 20 in the first group, moving in tactical formation. Another 15 to the east, more coming from the village, including the 3 fighters she'd let live. Mercy coming back to haunt her. 35 fighters in the first wave, all armed with AK-47s, RPGs, machine guns. This was a full assault meant to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Ilara's hand hovered over the detonator, watching them gather, watching them commit their forces. Patience. Wait for the perfect moment. The fighters began their advance, moving up the slope in a coordinated push, close enough now that she could see their faces. "Fire in the hole," Ilara said calmly, and pressed the detonator. The explosion was apocalyptic. The fuel drum erupted in a fireball 300 feet high. The lead assault team simply ceased to exist. 12 men vaporized, others thrown through the air like rag dolls. "Light them up," Ilara shouted in open fire. Her first shot dropped a fighter at 500 meters. Second shot took out a machine gunner. Beside her, Brennan fired controlled bursts. From below, Drummond's M240 roared to life. The enemy scattered, seeking cover, but Ilara gave them no time. She worked methodically, picking off threats. Fighter with RPG, dead. Fighter rallying others, dead. Her ammunition dropped. 5 rounds. 3. 1. The rifle clicked, empty. She'd made every round count, but the enemy was still coming. Ilara grabbed a captured AK-47 and kept firing. The weapon was crude, but at close range it worked. An hour into the battle, an RPG hit the building corner. Stone and dust blasted inward. Ilara felt something hot slice across her shoulder. Fresh blood flowed. "I'm hit," she gasped. "How bad?" Brennan shouted. "Still in the fight," she lied, switching the rifle to her right hand. 2 hours in, McKenna screamed from the medical room. "He's coding again. Chief, I can't. He's dying." They were down to last magazines. The enemy was preparing a final push. 1 chance left. "Ironside," Ilara called down. "Wire that last drum to blow on my signal. Everything we've got." "Chief, that's our whole defensive perimeter," Brennan protested. "We don't need defense anymore," Ilara said grimly. "We need a signal so big, God himself sees it. We end this now." She grabbed the detonator, moved to the central window. Enemy fighters everywhere, 40 or more. They thought they had the Americans trapped. "Everyone downstairs now," Ilara ordered. "McKenna, get Sullivan ready to move. When I blow this, we have maybe 5 minutes before this structure comes down. We run for the North Canyon." "That's suicide," Brennan said. "We're dead if we stay," Ilara countered. "Trust me one more time." Brennan looked at her, then nodded. "Rangers lead the way." Ilara watched the enemy form up, watched them commit everything. The wolf's voice on the radio giving final orders. "Now!" Ilara screamed and pressed the detonator. The third fuel drum was inside the old fuel depot, surrounded by decades of leaked diesel. When it detonated, it created a secondary blast that ignited everything combustible. The fireball rose 400 feet, a mushroom cloud that registered on seismic instruments 40 kilometers away. The mining facility shuddered. The enemy fighters in the kill zone disappeared, vaporized by heat exceeding 2,000 degrees. Ilara was already moving, down the stairs, into the room where McKenna and Brennan were hauling Sullivan. "Go! Move! North exit!" They burst from the building as a support beam crashed where they'd stood. The structure was collapsing, fire consuming everything. Ilara grabbed Drummond's travois, adding her failing strength. Every muscle screamed, but she pulled, kept moving. They made it 50 meters before Ilara's legs gave out. She fell hard, unable to get back up. "Chief!" Brennan dropped the litter, running back. Don't stop for me, Ilara tried to shout. Shut up and move. Brennan hauled her up with one arm. We leave no one behind. Your words, Chief. They staggered forward together. Behind them, the facility collapsed completely. But not all the enemy was out of the fight. Through the smoke, Ilara saw a Toyota with a DSHK heavy machine gun, racing around the flank. The gunner swinging the weapon toward them. And in the distance, the thump of helicopter rotors. Two Apache gunships came screaming over the ridgeline, chain guns firing. Behind them, a Chinook transport. That's our ride, Drummond shouted. Run! But the technical was in range, the DSHK opening up, rounds walking toward the Chinook as it descended. A crew chief thrust his M4 into Ilara's hands as they reached the helicopter. Chief, he's got our range, 600 meters. Ilara's body was done, broken, running on empty, but she was still a SEAL, still a sniper. She settled at the open ramp, the helicopter hovering 3 feet off ground. The world steadied despite everything. 600 meters, moving platform, moving target, relative velocity 75 miles per hour. The mathematics filled her head automatically. Lead 8 feet, compensate for rotor wash, factor downward angle. Through the sights, she found the gunner. He was tracking the Chinook, about to fire. In that frozen moment, Ilara thought of Marcus, of Sterling declaring her dead, of these Rangers who'd trusted her. Everything came down to one impossible shot. She squeezed the trigger. The gunner's head snapped back. He fell from the truck, the DSHK firing skyward harmlessly. The Chinook's skids hit ground. Hands grabbed Ilara, pulling her aboard. She collapsed on the deck. She's crashing, McKenna's voice cut through the fog. BP 60 over 30. Ilara felt hands on her, felt an IV starting, but it seemed distant. She'd done her part. The Rangers were safe. Mission accomplished. The helicopter shuddered. Hydraulics failing, the pilot shouted. 8 minutes to base. You'll make it, Ilara whispered. You didn't come this far to crash now. McKenna was crying, holding Ilara's hand. Don't you dare die. That's an order, Chief. Her eyes closed. The darkness finally rushed in. The Chinook made it to FOB Dwyer on failing hydraulics in prayer. It hit the landing pad hard, skids collapsing, tail striking concrete. But everyone aboard was alive. Medical teams swarmed. Sullivan was offloaded first, rushed to surgery. Drummond followed. Brennan stumbled out. McKenna refused to leave Ilara's side. In the trauma bay, 5 surgical teams worked through the night. 5 broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, deep laceration, shrapnel wounds, severe concussion, massive blood loss. But alive. Commander Blake Sterling arrived 4 hours after extraction. He hadn't slept since declaring Ilara dead. He took a seat beside her ICU bed. She was unconscious, would be for 2 more days. Intubated, ventilated, more machines than person, but alive. Sterling sat in that chair for 3 days. He read her personnel file cover to cover, realized he'd trained the best operator he'd ever worked with, and then left her to die. On the 3rd day, her eyes opened. Sir, she whispered. Sterling jerked awake. Ilara, thank God. The Rangers? All alive, all of them. Sterling's voice was thick. Sullivan made it through surgery. 8 hours in the OR, but he's stable. Drummond's going to walk again. McKenna's back on duty. Brennan submitted you for the Medal of Honor. Relief flooded through Ilara. Tears slipped down her cheeks. We got them home. No, Sterling said quietly. You got them home. After I left you to die. You followed protocol, Ilara said firmly. Extraction under fire, 1 presumed KIA, 2 wounded. You made the right call, sir. The hell I did, Sterling's voice cracked. I left you. Do you know what that's done to me? You'd have gotten more people killed, Ilara interrupted, including yourself. I was buried under 40 tons of rock. Medically, tactically, I was dead. You saved who you could save." Sterling shook his head. "When I got the report you were alive, that you'd saved 4 Rangers," his voice broke. "Christ, Alara, you shouldn't have had to do that alone." "I wasn't alone," Alara said softly. "I had 4 Rangers counting on me. That's what kept me moving." Before Sterling could respond, there was a knock. Brennan entered, arm in sling, followed by McKenna, then Drummond in a wheelchair. Behind them, Sullivan, pale but alive, also in a wheelchair. "Chief," Brennan said, voice thick with emotion, "we heard you were awake." Over the next hour they talked. Brennan told her the 6-shot clearing was already called the Thorn Maneuver at Fort Benning. Drummond showed photos of his daughters, explained he'd video-called them from the hospital. McKenna cried and said Ilara was her hero. Sullivan, still weak, managed to speak. "In the river, when I was dying, you promised my mom would see me again. She's flying in tomorrow. You kept your promise, Chief." Eventually, the nurse shooed them out. Each ranger gripped her hand before leaving, a bond forged in fire and blood. When the door closed, only Sterling remained. "You've got options," he said carefully. "Medical retirement, full benefits, teaching position. You've earned it. No one would question it." Ilara looked out the window at the peaceful German countryside. She thought about the easy path, the honorable exit. "I've been thinking about why I became a SEAL," she said slowly. "At first it was anger, determination to prove doubters wrong. But that changed." "How?" Sterling asked. "Marcus died because his team couldn't get back for him. I became a SEAL to make sure that never happened on my watch, to ensure no one was ever left behind. Gender had nothing to do with it in the end. It was about the mission, about people depending on each other to make it home." She turned to face him. "Those Rangers didn't care I was a woman when I was dragging them through enemy territory. They cared that I could shoot, lead, and wouldn't quit. That's what being a SEAL means. That's what I want to get back to." Sterling studied her. "You're saying you want active duty." "I'm saying I never left. Not in the ways that matter." She gestured to her bandaged body. "These scars just prove I can take the hit and keep moving. The teams need operators like that. Physical therapy will be brutal. Months, maybe a year." Ilara managed a slight grin. "Good thing brutal is my specialty, sir." Sterling laughed, tension releasing. "All right, I'll talk to command. But Ilara, off the record, I'm damn proud to serve with you." "Same, sir. Same." A week later, physical therapy began. Captain Anderson took one look at Ilara's chart and determined expression. "Chief Thorne, we'll start with gentle range of motion today." "When do we start the real work?" Ilara asked. "Real work won't begin for several weeks. First we need—" "Captain," Ilara interrupted gently, "with respect, I need to get back to my team. Whatever timeline you're thinking, cut it in half." Anderson studied her patient, saw the steel that no injury could diminish. "All right, Chief, challenge accepted. But I'm pushing you harder than you've ever been pushed." "Looking forward to it," Ilara said, and meant it. As the sun set over Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Ilara Thorne began the long road back. Not to prove anything to doubters, not to make statements about gender, but because she was a SEAL, because her team needed her, because she'd made a promise to herself, to her brother's memory, to 4 Rangers who'd trusted her. She'd left no one behind in those mountains, and she sure as hell wasn't leaving herself behind now. 6 months later, fully recovered and cleared for duty, Ilara stood in a briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command. Sterling was there, along with a new team, a new mission. The intelligence officer was explaining a hostage situation in a cave complex 12 kilometers inside hostile territory. 12 Americans held by a Taliban splinter group. Location confirmed. Window for rescue is closing fast. Sterling looked at Ilara, a question in his eyes. She checked her rifle, the familiar weight of her Mk-13, a comfort in her hands. The scope had been replaced, the crack gone, but she'd kept the same rifle. Some things you didn't replace. Sir, she said with a slight smile, I've done worse. Sterling nodded. All right, Ghost, let's go get them. As the team moved out toward the waiting helicopters, Elara thought about the title they'd given her officially now. Ghost. The seal who'd returned from the dead. The operator who'd been buried alive and come back carrying 4 Rangers. They'd declared her dead. They'd held a memorial. They'd folded her flag. But ghosts don't die. They return. And when they do, they're ready for whatever comes next. Because the only easy day was yesterday.